If you do, feel free to put something in the chat and we can stop doing that. But we're going to jump right in. So grateful to have each and every one of you here today to share with you what we've discovered is something that's really needed in the world right now. I think for Jason and I, we've known for some time that this approach is needed, but what we're learning very quickly is that there's actually a lot of ways that this can help. So really quickly, what we're going to cover tonight is essentially 5 or 6 key things. We're going to give you some experiences through life-giving interviews. We're going to walk through stories of resilience and some key lessons. We're going to talk about online convening and what we call 3.0, so not necessarily 1.0, which many of you are likely seeing, 2.0, how do we evolve to 3.0. We're going to talk a little bit about exchange and the approach that we like to utilize. Then we'll do some actual crowdsourcing strategies with everybody on this call before we open it up to Q&A. And so with that, what I'd love to do is jump right into an exercise. And for those of you that did get the email, I kind of alluded to the fact that we were going to do that. What we're going to start with is something that we like to call Parrot Interviews or life-giving interviews. And so in just a few moments here, I'm going to open up space where we're gonna invite each and every one of you to join a breakout room where you're going to be interviewing someone else on this call. And so as you go into those interviews, I just want to emphasize some key things that really help to make these life-giving interviews, right? So what does it mean to listen in a Parrot interview? What does it mean to listen in an appreciative fashion? Well, it basically means letting the other person have the space to tell their story, and sometimes that means providing for silence if it's necessary. It means being genuinely curious and caring about what the other person's sharing. It means listening to learn versus listening to respond. It is an interview, as I said, so if you think about it in the traditional fashion, many of us have been in interviews. So we want to give people the space, let the interviewee tell his or her story, and keep in mind that it's not a dialogue, like I said before. One other thing we'd love for you to do is, feel free to invite that person to expand on their story, right? To probe deeper. And one of the key things that I love to share about, how do you probe deeper? The easiest way to do that is to look for where you see energy in the person sharing that story. And it could be emotional energy, it could be positive energy, just something that really means something to them. That's a great spot to take the opportunity to probe a little bit deeper, right? So some other ways to actually probe could be as simple as asking a question like, tell me more about what was happening, or what was going on that would make you feel that way. What was your contribution to that specific story or moment, or what were other people doing that helped create that experience? Okay, so that's essentially how you go into a Parrot interview in a way that's going to give life to what we're about to share. So the questions that I'm going to ask you to go through in these life-giving interviews, in these Parrot interviews, are really simple, right? So there's 2 questions that I'm going to have you ask, and in just a second here, I'll pull it up on screen. So for those of you that are frantically writing, you don't need to do that. But I love to just see how simple we can make these questions before we roll them out. And so really what we're going to do is we're going to first interview the other person around a story of resilience, right? A story of resilience. So you're simply going to ask the person to reflect on a time where they faced what seemed like an insurmountable challenge, right? A time when they faced a challenge, and perhaps maybe it was a challenge that they didn't immediately have a solution for, but they were able to pull through, right? So a time that they faced what seemed to be an enormous challenge, and they were able to pull through. If you want to think about, asking the question, what happened in that specific experience, and what superpowers or strengths allowed you to persevere or to overcome? Okay, so that's the first question you're going to ask the person. Just reflect on a really challenging time that you were able to pull through. Tell the story of what happened, and then reflect on what superpowers or strengths allowed you to persevere. And then the second question is really simple, right? We call it key lessons. What are the key lessons that you can pull from this experience that made you stronger, that made you who you are today? Okay, so a challenging time where you persevered, and then what are the key lessons that we can pull from that story? All right, so Jason, if I can get you to help me create some breakout rooms. It looks like we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 people, so it's perfect. I'm randomly going to choose who goes into these breakout rooms. Before I send you in, you will have 15 minutes in total. Okay, so 15 minutes, and we will give you a couple broadcast messages out to your breakout rooms. And in those broadcast messages, we're basically going to tell you we're halfway through, please switch. So in the first 7.5 minutes, I'm just going to look at the first 2 people I have on my screen. Steven's going to interview Mary. And after, halfway through that, we're just going to switch roles, right? So Mary's going to turn around and interview Steven. And as you do that, we got 2 more people joining, so this is perfect. As you do that interview and you make the switch, what I'd love for you to do is just acknowledge really quickly something that you appreciated about what you just heard. Okay, so 7.5 minutes, interview the person. When we switch it over, the second 7.5, the other person will interview them. And then we're going to bring you back into the big group here and have some people share what they just went through. So for, I think, Christopher and Tim who just joined, Tim, I know you've been through this before. It's good to see you. We're going into Parrot Interviews, right? So you're going to interview someone else, 7.5 minutes, then switch. The questions are really simple. First is a story of resilience. Reflect on a time where you faced a challenge and you were able to overcome. What are the strengths or superpowers that allowed you to persevere? And then what are the key lessons from that made you stronger? All set? Any questions before I put you into the breakout rooms? Okay, it's now pretty much half past the hour, quarter past the hour, about half past the hour, we're going to bring you back in. 7.5 minutes for one interview, switch over 7.5 minutes before we bring you back.
All right, and we will have one group of 3. So for that group, just take 5 minutes and interview each other.
Okay, have fun.
Everybody's coming
all
back.
All right.
Totally connected.
So here's the $1 million question. Did you guys finish?
We did.
We did, yep.
Awesome.
We were on time. We switched.
It's good to see you, Tim. It's been a while. How you
doing? Good. Yeah, it's kind of crazy times right now, but yeah.
It is.
So,
I was in your neck of the woods in January.
Oh, really?
Yeah, did an event in some casino there, right in an industrial area. I don't know what it's called. Yeah. All right. I think we've got everybody back. Did we lose? Oh, there's Ben. Okay. Wonderful. So what I'd love to do now is just take a moment. I did quiz the first few people that came back to see if they actually finished their interview. So hopefully everybody did. What I'd love to do now is just invite a few of you to share either a story of resilience that you shared with the other person you were paired up with, or perhaps a story that you heard from someone else that really resonated with you that you think the rest of the group should hear. So does anyone want to volunteer to go first? And I'm pretty sure I know who's going to do that. Oh, he's holding out on me. Does anyone want to volunteer? Tim, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so actually, both of our stories were kind of, I guess maybe just because the current situation, we both were around like right around the time of the last kind of financial crisis back in 2008. But I'll talk about Trenton's. He talked about how he had just started a new company and then some changes hit, and there were a bunch of layoffs, and his boss got laid off, and he got a new boss come in, and he talked about how he just kind of was vulnerable and approached this lady and just kind of talked about where he was coming from, and just kind of opened up to her, and then as a result she kind of did the same. They kind of developed a good professional relationship, but also at the personal level, just kind of getting to know each other. And I kind of really like that that approach in terms of just making things real at work like that. I've kind of found that the last couple of weeks, everyone's working virtually at my company, and it's just kind of nice to get on the phone. We've been doing a lot of video calls just to kind of connect and feel like things are somewhat normal. So I guess just kind of the lesson there is in that time of hardship to really, be vulnerable and turn, kind of sounded to me like turning towards that instead of kind of backing away from it. So I thought that was kind of cool, and just, that whole power of going first and being vulnerable. So yeah.
And I love that you said turning toward. I remember that from our
Yeah.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you, Tim.
Yep.
And thank you, Trent. Anyone else have a story of resilience? And what I loved about how Tim shared that is he actually captured a few of the key lessons as well. Hear from one or two, maybe three more stories of resilience, something you heard from someone else or yours, Simon?
Yeah, so we had a couple of similar stories, but I'll share mine. It was a story coming out of a loss of a pregnancy, and kind of how we were able to navigate that. Talked about the kind of inability to try and be strong. That expectation of being strong as a man, which lasted for like the equivalent of 5 minutes before I broke down like a mess. And then really that kind of shared superpower being the openness to actually be able to talk about it with my wife and with others. And one of the kind of learnings we came up with and talked about kind of as a group was, in the moment, in those times of quote unquote resilience, it doesn't feel like a superpower. It doesn't feel like resilience. It feels like a kind of dogged necessity of taking one step forwards that might be forward, sideways, or backwards, but it's just that ability to move out of the inertia and start a direction. But in hindsight, we can recognize the superpower that created that move from complete inertia.
Love that. Thank you, Simon. One of the things that we often talk about when we do our training programs is that we actually don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on that experience. So as you go back and think about that specific thing, I love what you shared is that when you're in the mud, you don't realize how you're actually getting out of it and the superpowers that you have. So thank you for sharing that. John, do you want to share yours?
I would love to. Thank you, Jason. So yeah, I had a really good chat with Douglas, and Douglas shared his experience where he was around 12, and his father was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he was dealing with the trauma of just that news, and given the fact that the medical technology was not the same as it is today. Unfortunately, that the prognosis wasn't good, and it kind of ebbed and flowed, and he was in full remission, and then found out in fact months later that the cancer was everywhere. So he was dealing with the fact that he was going to be losing his father. He's one of 5 kids. He was the only boy, so I think the kinship and the connection to his dad was probably very special and different than it would be with his other siblings. So I think that, through that, and he didn't necessarily say it or call it out, but I think that, he's really reflected on, probably a little bit of self-compassion and putting some perspective on some of the regrets that he has. Because I asked him, what is the one thing that you regret the most? And he said, time, and the fact that he wishes that he spent more time with him. I'm not sure he would have necessarily been able to change that necessarily. But the interesting thing that I did find that he did call out when he talked about his superpower was just pushing through and getting the job done. Basically, his mom was not working at the time that his dad fell ill. And because he was so sick that he couldn't, his mom had to start working again. So anything that Douglas wanted or needed to probably help provide for his family, he was working up to 3 jobs, minimum wage when you're, in your early to mid teens. And I think that, based on listening to him, he really just, it gave him the drive to push through the discomfort when it's kind of like, well, I'd rather be hanging out with my buddies, going to the movies or playing football. I'm just going to get down to brass tacks and push through and get the things that I know that I need or just be successful. So I thought that was, it really resonated.
Love it. And thank you, John, for sharing that. And thank you, Doug, for sharing such a powerful story.
Yeah.
Let's hear from one more. Could be your story. It could be the story you heard from someone else. One more share. Mr. Doug.
Yeah, I'll share John's. John shared with, he's been married to his wife nearly 16 years now. And she's gone through some mental health problems the last few years. And even 2 years ago, it was really dark, really deep. And the main thing that he really took from that was, now looking back, the ability to finally realize, after he's helped his wife and was doing everything he could to stay on top of helping his wife, finding answers and taking care of their sons. He had the realization that he needed to take care of himself. And once he started to do that, when he realized his self-care had fallen off, he was able to provide even in a better way. And now, where him and his wife are, is even, as he described it, a deeper, more colorful love than they've ever had before. So I really appreciated that, and really appreciated that, the aspect of his, dawning on him, that self-awareness about self-care, because I think a lot of us get caught up in doing for so many others that we forget about filling the tank for ourselves.
It's a great story. I feel like Jason put you up to sharing that for me today. Wonderful. So a couple key themes, right, that I heard in the first one. I'm really going to come back to a couple times later as we go through the rest of this webinar. But the ability to be open and vulnerable, and recognize that sometimes just by doing that, strengths are emerging and we don't even see it. I heard self-compassion and self-care as 2 really important things. And then, what Doug's story embodied is really putting one foot in front of the other, right? And even in those what seem to be like very difficult times, as long as we keep taking small incremental actions, you'll persevere. So what a wonderful way to open up the call. And as I unpack that, one of the things I want to share with you is that, anytime you're bringing a group together, especially in a time like we're facing, one of the things that's happening, and you can recognize in this, you can take this immediately back to the teams that you lead, to the organizations that you work with, is that there's a conversation happening in each and every one of the team members' heads, right? And that conversation is likely right now not about whatever it is you're bringing them together to talk about. And the best way to develop trust and create a space where you can actually push through and start talking about the important things that you want to talk about is to honor that by having a conversation that brings it to the surface, right? And so that's essentially what we just modeled on this call, and we also modeled a bunch of other things. So I want to unpack that learning with you all really quickly, and just do that by asking each of you a few questions, right? So as you think about, some of you have been through this before with Jason and I, others on this call, this is the first time you've experienced something like this, and many of you probably the first time you've experienced it in the virtual setting. So what did you notice about that specific experience, right? Immediately starting a call where we're coming together and you think we're going to be sharing a bunch of insights. What did you notice about the experience Could be the question that we asked. It could be about how the conversation happened. It could be about how everybody was participating. Could even maybe be about what was happening within your own head, your state of mind. So anyone willing to reflect on any of those things, what did they notice? What did you notice about that specific experience itself? John?
Yeah, for me, I would say, not having met Douglas before, it was cool, obviously, to meet him, but to learn something so intimate about somebody was really powerful and immediately connecting. Because it's not something you necessarily share with just everyday people. And kind of conversely, on the other side, to be vulnerable and to share something that maybe it wasn't necessarily in this case, but that could be a little bit embarrassing. It again just reinforces that connection and creates the opportunity to learn a little bit more yourself through other people's experiences.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, the key word there I heard was the ability to create with someone you just met a connection that quickly, even in a virtual environment, right?
Yeah.
Love it.
Absolutely.
Here for one or two more people, what did you notice or experience, Brian?
Yeah, sure. I think sometimes in social settings and in professional settings, there's certain voices that are louder than others. And so when you're able to bring all the diversity of experiences together, it gets to be more powerful. Some of the people that are the most quiet people have had the most powerful experiences, but you don't know that because they don't speak up at work, or maybe they don't speak up in social settings. So that's what I immediately thought about, because everyone has these great experiences and great things that they can share about themselves.
Love that, Brian. That's a great observation, right? Is instead of hearing from the select few people that either are presenting or like to be in the conversation, every single person on this call had an opportunity to share, and there was an opportunity not only for them to share, but their story to be heard by the bigger group. And if you'll notice that some of you shared your partner's story, right? So as you come into a group, if I had asked that question of all of you immediately all at once in the bigger group, just by a show of hands, how many people would have actually volunteered to answer? And Scott and Doug, you're not allowed to answer this one. Yeah, not a lot of people, right? The tendency is like, oh my God, you want me to share my story with all of these people and be center stage? I don't think so. Beautiful. Thank you for observing that, Brian. Anyone else? What did you notice in going through that experience? Could be about the question, the conversation, the level of participation, or what was happening inside of your own head, or what you were feeling.
Maybe I don't know if it's a slight counterpoint to that or not, but the immediate reaction from kind of our group as we came in was, one, wow, that's a deep question, and two, I don't know if I have anything worthy to share. I don't know if I've been through anything truly resilient, right? And a number of us said that. And I really like your point, Brian, but it kind of the flip side of it is how quick we are to dismiss the relevance of our own experience for others. And I think that kind of struck me a little bit, that we all initially entered the conversation within that, got over that within a minute, 90 seconds, and shared stories that impacted, for us, all three of us were both impacted by the story and could find similar themes and experiences that we shared, but that immediate reaction was, oh, I've got nothing.
It's a beautiful observation on so many levels, Simon. I'm glad you brought it up. Right? There's a few different things I'm going to mention here. One of them is the reason there was some safety in actually sharing, even though you had those thoughts going on in your mind, and I love that you're open to sharing that, is that we put you into the smallest groups possible, right? It's a lot less intimidating for someone to share, even if they think their story isn't worth sharing, in that small setting because it's a lot safer, right? And yet your story, when we came out to the bigger group, you shared that with the larger group. The other thing is, when you think about it, I'm glad you honored the deepness of this question, because it's really important, and we've done this with several groups now, is a lot of people, their inner reaction to that question is, oh my God, I can't believe he just went there, right? I can't believe he just asked that question at the start of this call. But there's a couple words in there that are critical, right? The fact that we asked you, what are your strengths and superpowers, and what are the key lessons that made you stronger, took that from a dark place, from a deep place, to what can I learn from this? And oh, that's not so bad, right? So the words that we use in the question, if we're going to create something that's going to allow people to go there, we need to make sure that how we design that question is generative enough in nature and has some positive elements that people pull the things that we want to from the experience itself. The final thing I want to point out, because Simon, you just unpacked a whole bunch of things, is the other thing that we did there is we didn't go into these paired interviews and say, you all have 30 minutes, right? We said you have roughly 7.5 minutes, and for the one group, 5 minutes each, right? And so the pressure of time forces you to come out of your head and go into your heart and your gut, right? Because you don't have the time to do anything else, right? So there's a bunch of things that were happening in how that question was designed and facilitated to honor the exact thoughts that you just shared with the group. So thank you, Simon. I think, Ben, you had raised your hand to go next.
Yeah, Jason raised it for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what I noticed was something that you just mentioned, that, you know, I think there's sort of the juxtaposition of the depth and deepness of the experience that we all shared, and the sort of the high of the overcoming that challenge, right? I think there's I think when you first asked, like, what did you notice, was sort of it's sort of a palpable type of attention that you can sense in the room, right? I think we all kind of funneled in the room, and it was more, hey, I don't know if there's more levity, but I think there's a marked change in everyone's attention or level of attention after we came back. And it's not, you can almost sense that everybody's relived a little bit of their story, but is also more assured of themselves as a result of being able to celebrate their win or their overcoming that challenge.
I love that, Ben. It creates more of the energy that we want, right? It develops trust and safety, and connects each and every one of us to each other in many different ways. Beautiful. So, you know, the irony of what I'm about to do next is to share with all of you that a bunch of information, which is exactly as I'm sharing the information. The irony of that is that I'm going to be talking to you about how do you facilitate and lead teams and bring people together online without presenting a whole bunch of information. But I just want to call out that we're 50 minutes into this call, and there's not been one slide put on the screen, right? And that's important. So Jason and I were having a conversation right before this saying, how much do we actually have to put into PowerPoint? And many of you who have been in groups that we've led in the past know that you never see a PowerPoint slide from us, right? I mean, Doug, Scott, Tim, Trent, many of you have been through these where we don't pull up slides. So I had to qualify that before I do this. But the importance of going through that exercise to experience what I'm about to tell you you experienced, you've already unpacked most of the learning for me. So what I'm adding here is just something that hopefully elevates it a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Give me 1 second, and hopefully technology cooperates. Okay, I gotta find where Zoom went. There we go. Okay, so you should see a title slide up there, Virtual Meetings 3.0, the future of online convening. Everybody see my screen okay? Just a thumbs up. Perfect. So I'm gonna run through this really quickly and allow you to experience, and we'll unpack another exercise here in just a minute. So really, if you think about it, and some of you may have seen this, many of you probably haven't because it's recent, right? There's a Seth Godin blog post that he just released the other day that I thought was perfect to quote in this specific context. And what we're talking about today, what we're experiencing here on this call is really what we like to think is a virtual evolution. And we've been talking about this for many years in terms of a leadership evolution or a convention evolution. But how do you bring groups of people together? It's not new to the approach that we use. But what we see right now is that what Seth talked about the other day is that the world's changing faster and more suddenly than every single one of us expected, right? And it's beyond just the health issues or the medical emergencies that many people are going through. But what's happening is many of us are being asked to quickly move our meetings, our classes, our conventions online, right? And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that there's a huge risk in adopting the status quo from offline into online that's even worse, right? So we're at risk of taking what we do offline, moving it online, but in a fashion that doesn't allow people to connect, right? Because one of the things when we're in person is we can still connect. And what he said at the end of that is we can make it better. We have a choice. We have an opportunity to really have conversations. There's a link to the article, and Jason, I don't know if you can post it in the chat box for people. It's a great read. It's a great read if you want to go check that out. In fact, we can email it out to everybody after this as well. So what does this mean, right? I think every single one of us, now that we're a good week into this, or some of you maybe for a couple days, you've been part of some form of online meetings. Some of you are in the Alliance where you experience it all the time, but I think each and every one of us will sense in the workplace for sure, and some of the meetings and conventions that are happening, is that the current models, and I would call them 1.0 and 2.0, are leaving a lot on the table, right? There's a lot to be be added to the experience, right? So if I said, what does that mean? What is online 1.0 and online 2.0? Online 1.0 is essentially what I'm doing right now, right? Presenting information, downloading news or information, doing a slideshow where there's one person talking to a group of people, right? So I would call that online 1.0. Online 2.0 is more to the screen that we started, but without the exercise, where you have a semi-engaged audience, right? That's being called on for input. But what's happening in the room is that they're always left wondering when or if they're going to be called upon in front of the large group. So it goes back to the example I shared before. Had I asked such a deep question, and many people wouldn't in this environment, but had I asked even any question of the group, what would have likely happened, and I can tell you from deep personal experience, it does happen, is everybody would have been like this, right? It's really hard to jump into that conversation because there's huge risk with jumping in because you're center stage and you haven't had a chance to really vet your ideas or see, to Simon's point, if your stories were sharing in the first place, right? So as we think about this, right, we all know there's a lot being left on the table. What's online 3.0? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. So if you think about 1.0 and 2.0, what's really happening as we move our offline meetings online, right? What we're essentially doing from our in-person meetings is we're taking that info sharing and just putting it into the virtual space. The problem is that many of your offline meetings, many of the offline meetings that we're all a part of, are unnecessary in the first place, right? But the benefit that we have is because we're coming together in person, the close proximity to one another is actually creating some form of connection. So it's like this fail-safe. Doesn't matter how bad your meetings are, because people are coming together, they're still having an opportunity to connect, right? Building on that, most of our 1.0 or 2.0 meetings are passive, right? The issues of status, where I think it was Simon or someone else, or I think it was Brian that said it, right? Where the dominant voice is always sharing on that call or in the meeting. That's what I call issues of status, or wasted time where you're in a meeting and like, why are we here? Why are we doing this? Compliance, where I have to participate because I know someone's going to hold me accountable if I don't. Boredom, or information, insufficient information flow. We're just moving that from offline to online, right? So nothing has really changed. We're still untapping audience wisdom, right? Because there's centralized sharing from a limited handful of experts, we're not tapping into any of the stories, the wisdom, the experience, or the lessons that each and every person has. And some of those pieces of wisdom are never going to be tapped into because that person doesn't have that dominant voice. So if we don't create an opportunity where they can be part of the conversation, that's never going to come true. Contributing comes with great social risk. I just talked about this a minute ago, right? Whereas if you do participate, you're immediately center stage, and you haven't created the space for safety first. There's a void of connection, inclusion, and cohesion. Actually, let me go back to the previous one, right? When we talk about contributing comes with great social risk, if you notice when I did the first exercise, we put you into pairs and then brought you back and asked for some shares, and there was some safety created, right? Only then did I ask a question of the entire group where I allowed people to volunteer, and what happened? People immediately started to answer the question because they already felt that safety. So because we created safety first, people were more willing to share after. The online meetings are simply void of connection, inclusion, and cohesion. All the things that you guys identified, right? You all identified was connection, right? Diversity and how people are coming together, how quickly you created that, the deepness of the question, the energy that we created in the trust. All those things you identified from that first exercise. Technology, if you don't have conversations online, technology just creates one more barrier to participant engagement. So it's actually easier to hide from people. And then finally, this is something important to call out. Distractions are easier, right? It's easier to be distracted. I got my phone right here. I got 2 screens going. I can see my emails popping up. The thing is, for everybody else, it's really obvious to see, right? It's really obvious for me to see when Jason's distracted, right? But it's not obvious to him because he's already distracted and he doesn't realize because he's not in the room. So people are easily, following the next latest thing that's happening in their life, and other people are actually witnessing it, which just amplifies the fact that people are bored in meetings. Okay, so with all that, what's online 3.0? What is this evolutionary leap that we're calling for in virtual meetings that I think everybody needs right now? Is really this move from passive to active learning and collaboration. It's a move from the select few people to including all voices in the conversation, which is what you guys shared from what happened in that first exercise. It's moving away from what I'm doing right now in info sharing to crowdsourcing wisdom, which we're going to do in a minute. It's moving away from convincing to conversing. And it's moving away from being distracted to engaged, because when you're doing that exercise, right, in that first 45, 50 minutes of the call, how many people looked at their phone or another computer screen or were distracted? Probably not a single person, because you were engaged, right? It's moving from disconnected to included, and it's moving away from anxious, am I going to be called upon, to excited to share what I have to offer the group. And so if you think about it, in essence, this kind of articulates what we went through and what is exchange, right? There's 3 shifts that happen, right? The first shift was we moved from the select few voices to many voices. The second shift is we moved away from providing information by giving you answers and moved to asking questions, the spirit of inquiry. And the third shift was moving you from just being in the room to being engaged. And that's really exchange in a nutshell. When we went into BMW to lead this, what they came back with as a result of it was that this approach, exchange, is really the future of leading teams and organizations. And I think even more so now, it's needed because of this disconnection we're creating online that I just walked through, right? So who is it for? It's a method that's being used both in person and virtually by leaders, trainers. I don't need to go through all that with you. All of these different types of groups of people or individuals to create real-time results while enabling connection, inclusion, and safety. 2 of those things you all talked about based on what you noticed from that first exercise. The other thing I'll call attention to here is that you look at some of the companies that are using this approach. Every single one at the bottom here is using this approach in a virtual setting. And I can tell you, because Jason and I have been doing this, it's been used in a virtual setting for over 3 years, right? Many of you have experienced that firsthand. So Exchange is a multidisciplinary method that builds on several different methodologies. The first one being Appreciative Inquiry, which I'm going to talk about in more detail in just a second. It builds on system thinking, positive psychology, design thinking, and mirror flourishing. Okay? Multidisciplinary method builds on all those. The biggest one, which is where this was actually born, was Appreciative Inquiry. And so for those that don't know, Appreciative Inquiry in its simplest form is the search through questions for the best of what was, the best of what is, and the best of what could be. So I want to call attention to what Simon shared at the beginning, right? What Simon shared was that as he went back and reflected on his story, right? The story from the past, what was, in the moment, he didn't see the strengths or superpowers that were emerging for him. But when you search back into the past through questions, it becomes a lot easier to see. You can leverage the strengths and superpowers and lessons that maybe you forgot or maybe you didn't even realize were there, right? So it's a search through questions for the best of what was, is, and could be in any group of people in any setting, right? Where was it born? It was over 30 years ago now by an individual named David Cooperrider. David Cooperrider was called into Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio, obviously. But he was called in because Simon from Cleveland, he was called in because they were really struggling back at that time. And they were looking for something different. And so as David Cooperrider went in, he was doing his postdoctorate at Case Western at the time. What he noticed in the room, a room full of consultants and leaders, is they were all, talking about everything that was wrong, broken, and missing. And David could see in the room that the energy was just being sucked out of it, right? And so he thought, based on the research that he'd done in that moment, what if instead of focusing on what was wrong, what was broken, and what was missing, what if instead we focused on what was right? What if instead we focused on what was working? What if we focused on what it is we most wanted? What might happen? And so he did that. He brought those types of questions into that group, and he immediately saw them come to life. There was positive energy, there was trust, there was connection, right? And not only that, they didn't only come to life, they actually found solutions to everything they'd come together to talk about, and they found solutions to things they didn't even know they had problems with, right? They created something so much better, and they're world-renowned for the work they do at the Cleveland Clinic now. Okay, so what else have we learned with Exchange is really a couple key things, right? Is that you can move conversations from passive to active. You absolutely can do that, right? You can unlock collective wisdom. We can pull in all of these lessons within a really short period of time, and all of those lessons are much better coming from many of you than coming from one or two. And not only that, if you do that, if you move your conversations from passive to active and you unlock collective wisdom at speed, you not only replicate what happens in person, but for many, you're quite possibly going to elevate the experiences that you're already creating in your organization with your teams or groups when you move it online, which is pretty exciting if you think about that. Okay. So crowdsourcing wisdom, strategies for success with your family. And I'm going to end my share here in the spirit of not presenting any longer. I'm just noticing your comment here, Ben. So the connections are usually happening one-on-one before or after the offline meetings as well. Absolutely, great point. For those of you that noticed, when we opened up this call and we sent the invite out, and I know a couple of you likely didn't see it, but we created a window from 8:45 to 9, and we called it registration and connection time, right? And so exactly what happens in person, we try to replicate online so that people can actually come in early and use that time just to shoot the shit, to connect with one another, to do the things that they might do in a personal setting. But we did it in a way that was choreographed by asking generative positive questions, right? Jason was on here talking about, hey, what are you grateful for? What's something that's in your life that's happening right now that's positive, right? So you can actually create connection time before and after meetings by just opening up space to do that. Okay, I got to end my show here because it's being very distracting in the background. So what we want to move to now is another exercise. And if you notice really quickly, we're giving you exercise that exercises that you can immediately take back into your organization that are relevant to you right now. So the first one was really honoring conversations that are happening in people's heads. Josh, it's good to see you. Honoring the conversations that are happening in people's heads and taking them into paired interviews to really create connection, inclusion, and safety to pull key lessons out. The next one we want to take you through right now is something we call crowdsourcing strategies, right? And so we call it crowdsourcing wisdom in the in-person environment. We call it crowdsourcing wisdom is more like wisdom circles virtually. So there's a bunch of terminology I'm throwing at you here. But there's another one called crowdsourcing strategies. So really quickly right now, what we're going to do is we're going to do something that's relevant to every single person on this call. Actually, I made an assumption there that I shouldn't have made. Stephen, I'm not sure if you're a parent, but I'm sure you have a family. So I'm gonna assume that you can relate to this question. As you think about going back into your organization, right, just change the last part of this question and you can apply it in your organization. So the question I want you to reflect on right now is, how can you, as an individual, be innovative, creative, and supportive with and for your family right now? Right? So I'm doing two things. I'm honoring what's happening in our environment right now, and I'm relating it specifically to your situation. So if I wanted to take this back to a team, I could say, how might we be innovative, creative, and supportive with one another as we work through the challenges that we're facing, right? Simple way to just tweak that question based on a different environment, right? But the question I want you to focus on is, how can you be innovative, creative, and supportive with and for your family right now? Okay? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes here right now, 2-3 minutes. What I'd like each and every one of you to do, and this is why we asked for a pen and a paper, is just jot down 1 or 2 words per idea. But what are some ideas that you have in how you can be innovative, creative, and supportive with and for your family right now? Right? 1 to 2 words per idea. Write down as many possible ideas as you can in the next 2 to 3 minutes. Okay? Any questions before I get you to do that? Some people are writing, which is beautiful. Okay, how can you be innovative, creative, and supportive for your family right now? About another 30 seconds. Okay, awesome. So what I'm going to invite you to do next, in just a moment, we're going to put you into 2 more breakout rooms, right? 2 breakout rooms. There'll be 6 people in each room. And what we'd love for you to do as you go into your breakout rooms is just go around the group and share the ideas that you came up with. So one of the best ways to do this is as you go into your groups, let's say I'm with Ben, Josh, Scott, and John. Ben's going to share an idea, then Josh will share an idea, then Scott, then John, and then we'll go back to Ben, Josh, Scott, and John until nobody has any more ideas. And the concept here is that there's no judgment with the ideas, right? We're just accepting each idea. We're going for quantity over quality. As you hear each person share, what I would encourage you to do is look for any connections to the ideas that you had, right? So share the ideas. Think about it this way: is when one person shares, it's yes, and here's my idea, right? No judgment. After everybody shared their ideas, the task that we'd like you to take on as a group is to identify and group those major themes. So you've identified the higher connections. What are the major themes that you're seeing emerge? You might want to name those, and then capture your top 3 themes as a group that you're going to come back and share, okay? So everybody brainstorms their ideas, brings them into the group, you theme them, and then identify your top 3. The final thing we're going to ask you to do is nominate one person from your group to be the spokesperson to share it when you come back. You'll be surprised how many times I forget that instruction. So share your ideas, create the major themes, identify your top 3, and then nominate a spokesperson to bring it back to the large group. We're going to give you a total of 10 minutes to do this exercise. So if you'll notice, as soon as you get into those groups, you're going to have to move very, very quickly to get all of your ideas out and to start to theme them. We want the top 3 and a spokesperson to share when you come back. Any questions? Okay, Jason, do you have the rooms queued up? Awesome. Have fun. Often facilitate 12 of those right now. We will do in virtual settings. So almost everything that we can do in person right now we can do virtually as well. What you just experienced was 2, right? And so there's many different ways to do this in both in-person and online settings. So I'm going to share my screen one last time. Don't hold it against me. To share two final slides with you. The first one, so strategies for success virtually. The one key thing I will encourage you to do is ask questions, right? Ask questions of the group, and I'll talk about how you facilitate those questions in just a moment. Questions around high point stories. So when have you been at your best? Or what is a time where you can pull lessons from that we can carry into the future, right? Questions that allow people to crowdsource strategies, or questions that allow people to crowdsource wisdom. And we often do that in what we call wisdom circles. So putting people in where they have an opportunity. Some of you have heard it as open forum or man in the middle in the alliance, but wisdom circles where you have an opportunity to share something that you're looking for help or support on. People have an opportunity to ask questions of you, and then it's like this massive brainstorming around strategies of success that have helped them that could then help that individual. So those are some quick ways you can take questions and bring them into your group settings in a virtual environment. The other is to really facilitate conversations. If you haven't read this book, Conversations Worth Having, it's like a short read, a really great way to talk about how do you move conversations in a positive direction, in a generative direction, in pretty much any setting. So encourage you to reach out and buy that book. It's with a couple different faculty members that are part of Exchange as well. So the other thing is you ask questions and then facilitate a conversation. What I would say a big lesson for everybody is how quickly did we start this specific group setting in the virtual environment by facilitating a conversation, right? We went in the first 10 minutes and asked a question of you and then facilitated a conversation around it. The sooner you can do that, the sooner you create trust, connection, and safety on that call, and it opens up the rest of the meeting to do wonderful and amazing things. The other thing, as you ask a question, so think about how you're facilitating the conversation, you want to give people time to reflect or journal on that question. If you notice in the crowdsourcing strategies, I said take a few minutes now and just write out as many thoughts. I didn't immediately send you into a group where you hadn't already thought about them. Here's something else. When I did the Parrot Interviews, how many times did you notice that I read that question to you? I repeated it like 4 to 5 times because I knew I wasn't going to give you time to journal. I was giving you time in that moment to hear that question over and over and start to generate ideas in your head before I ever put you into conversation, right? So that's another part about facilitating conversations after you reflect and journal. The next thing is to utilize the small breakout room functionality within Zoom, right? You have to have a certain level of account. I think it's a pro account. I can send a video to everybody on how do you utilize breakout rooms, but utilizing breakout rooms is exactly what we talked about near the beginning of the call, is that it immediately takes away that center stage feeling. It allows for people that are feeling, I don't know if I want to share what I have to share. I don't know if it's meaningful enough. Because you're doing it in the smallest possible setting, it's safe for them to do that. And then their voice gets heard. And it has a chance to get heard over and over again to get to the bigger group. And then finally, we bring the large group together. And if you noticed, we're writing things down and I'm summarizing back to you each and every time. What are the themes that I'm hearing from you as a group, right? As I shared this specific slide with you, if you notice, I talked about connection and inclusion and safety, which were the words that you used after the first exercise, right? I'm using the language that you used, the wisdom that this group came up with to talk about how valuable this approach can be or what we're going to do moving forward. That's it. That's all we had to present. I do have one closing question I'm going to take you through in just a second, just to offer, support for help, and I'm going to qualify this before I go into it. As I mentioned in the post out there, it's a good thing. We're in high demand right now in terms of our time. We're working a lot of hours to try to bring this approach to as many people as possible because they recognize they need it right now. But all that being said, we want to do our best to support each and every one of you. So I'll just share, there's some different things that we do that you might be able to utilize. There's some 90-minute workshops that we did a training on just the other day for people on how to connect teams to a shared purpose, shared values, and come up with new ways of working in the virtual environment. We can work with you depending on where you're at to help you bring in the right questions and facilitate conversations in a virtual environment that create connection, inclusion, and safety. Hopefully, we've given you some tangible ideas that you can immediately take back into these virtual settings just by going through this call. That's the benefit of doing it in an experiential fashion. But if you do need help with something specific, reach out. If we can create the space to do that, we definitely will. It could be that you're looking at, and I'll talk about it on the next slide, in a bigger scale. For some organizations that we're working with, they're looking at, how do I make the learning environment that I lead, whether it be classroom, mastermind, community, how do I make that more experiential in nature? And so I can tell you that we utilize this approach in the classroom in our leadership training programs online. So Stephen Jonathan, who's part of one of our programs right now, is the one that referred you to this call. We use this approach in those sessions, and we actually teach this approach in those sessions. But we can help you or any instructors or community leaders move your learning from passive to active in the virtual environment. Or if you've got something where you're like, holy cow, my organization needs this, I need to set you up to talk to specific people, we can partner with you to identify your specific needs and create a customized solution to bring your teams to life. I don't want to go out on a limb and say we'll just offer this and do all of this out of the goodness of our heart. We're trying to do that. And that's what we've done to this point. We'll continue to try to do that. To honor, is there a way we can help just coach you quickly? And we're seeing that we can do that to design the right questions exercise that you can bring out to your entire organization or community. So reach out to myself or Jason, and we'll do our best to support you in this environment. This is more about getting this approach out there than anything else for us. That's all I had. So I'm going to open it up for questions in just a moment. But what I'd love to do first is just close with this, right? What is, for you, for each and every one of you, I'll give you the opportunity to answer both or one of these questions, right? What is the one biggest takeaway from this session that you're immediately going to implement as a result of our time here? Or it could be as simple as what's something or someone you want to acknowledge or appreciate. And no, this isn't a way to fish for us getting compliments we'd love for you to acknowledge someone or something as part of the discussions, the conversations that you each had here today on this call. So something you want to acknowledge or appreciate about someone or something, or one thing that you're immediately going to take from this and bring back to your team, organization, or community. Mary, go ahead.
I really loved the point that you brought up, Jeff, about about like passing the baton to each person. And so that one person would contribute whatever it is they contribute, but also before they contribute, they have to acknowledge the person before them. And I feel like that really does allow people to be present and to pay attention, not become distracted. And I plan to implement that in my family, like immediately, but I can see how that can be a great tool to use, like in like a work group setting, in like a conversation circle that I plan to have like for future retreats and stuff. So I think that's brilliant.
Thank you for saying that, Mary. And here's the other thing I need to say, right? And I didn't say it to this group, but people love being appreciated or acknowledged as well. So you're creating space in the environment for people to hear from others something that they really valued, and people they soak that up. People are starving for it in this world, right? So I want to qualify that. That's the real value in it, but it does happen to really increase participation, engagement on many levels. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to share, something they're going to take away and implement, or someone or something they want to acknowledge? We'll go Doug and then Tim.
I really like the way kind of the structuring of the question, the first question going from a dark place to almost a place of light, place of glory, so to speak. I can definitely utilize that with some of the teams that I coach. And then I just I appreciate Larry for everything he did for this call tonight. Did a hell of a job. I'm just messing with you. I appreciate you, Jason and Jeff, for doing this, taking your time. It's been great.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. Who was the other person that had their hand up? Was it Tim? Yeah.
Yeah, the thing I was just thinking about a lot of things, but we use at work, we've been using Zoom and Microsoft Teams now for a bit, and I'm doing a lot more video calls anyway, but I think typically it's just for a meeting where someone's presenting an idea and kind of more of a general discussion. I think there's some ideas from here as far as the breakout rooms, and you have a larger group of people when you're doing more of a maybe working session that we haven't used this type of format before. So I think they got some great ideas on how to just maybe facilitate that using the breakout rooms, but also just some of the ways of making sure everyone's involved. And so yeah, a lot of thoughts around that. So that was great.
Awesome. So I want to acknowledge a couple things with that, Tim. Right. One thing I would say is even if you have someone presenting, right, you can help in that environment by at the end of their presentation asking a question like the questions I just asked now. Hey, what's one thing you heard from what Tim just presented that you think you can immediately implement in the work that you do, or just something or someone you want to acknowledge, right? Something you want to acknowledge, or perhaps it was Tim himself, right? So you can immediately move that experience from passive to active, at least at some level. The other thing I'll say to you is if any of you are the ones presenting, I teach in a classroom, right? I teach in a physical classroom, which is now online. And I can tell you, I've done, what are we? We're 6 months into the term, right? Because it's a 8-month course. I've only used PowerPoint slides once the entire term, right? I never get up and talk to the students. I introduce a concept, I ask a question, I pull high point stories and lessons, and 9 times out of 10, they come up with almost all of the content I would have presented to them anyway. The wisdom is in the room. You just have to trust it by asking the right questions. So that's my encouragement to each and every one of you. If you leverage some of the exercises here, what you can do is you can get most of that knowledge out. And then at the end, if there was things that were missed, all you're doing is adding to it to elevate it even further. Does that make sense, Tim?
Yeah, and Jeff, I just wanted to add there too that I think one thing Jeff alluded to, and I think you just did too, Tim, is that if you throw a question out there to a big group of people like this, there's way too many places to hide and people won't want to jump in. Whereas if you take a group of people, you ask a powerful question, and then you do as we did on the call and get them into smaller groups and then task them with a specific outcome, they'll always come up with the outcome, right? So you facilitate the conversation where you create safety at the beginning, and then you get them in a working group together, reflecting on a question or whatever the task is, and then make sure that group has an outcome, and that way everybody gets involved.
Awesome. Anyone else want to share, Ben?
Yeah, so I mean, you guys probably, or some of you guys probably know that I get the privilege of utilizing this on a weekly basis, and I've had the chance to use variations of this for 3+ months now, and it's just really nice to see some of or hear about some of the nuance that I need to pick up on. I think, for example, I think the questions are of utmost important. Repeating the questions, giving that, just some of the details that you were able to explain today are incredibly powerful, and understanding the meaning behind them has also been very powerful. And for me, I think that one of the bigger takeaways was the idea of sort of having that intro time, which is something that I know I've struggled with on my time or my calls, trying to understand, how much time do we have at the beginning just to kind of ease into the conversation, and when to kind of turn it on, right, to flip the switch to, hey, all of a sudden we're getting deep. And I think allowing for that early time to just chit chat for a little bit is really powerful. But then also the other details about, giving them time for reflection, and then, giving them the instruction as you kind of went into those details is really, really good. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Ben. So we're going to open it into questions now. If anybody has questions, can stay on for about 10 more minutes. And maybe what we'll do is just raise your hand if you have your question. If we're finding that we're running low on time, we might gather 4 or 5 questions all at once and see if there's any common connections between them. So anyone have a question they wanted to pose to Jason or myself or the rest of the group?
I know Brian had a question he wanted to ask. Brian, do you want to jump in and ask that question?
Sure. How do you do this in a virtual conference when you have a bunch of people that never used Zoom before? And maybe you're not, maybe the main program's not in Zoom, but maybe a session could be in Zoom.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question. We actually did this week, Brian. So it's interesting, when everybody jumps off, people move around my screen. That's why you see my head move. There's a couple of different things that we've learned that really help, right? There's some information, if you notice, that I sent out in advance of the call. 90% of that, or 90% of the people won't ever read that or go through it anyways, right? This open connection time we talked about at the beginning, and I don't have the technical details. I can get that to you if you're really interested in, Brian. But we actually have a way to do a registration table in the virtual environment, which ultimately means as people come into the call, they join in small breakout rooms. And it's like we're taking their name. Okay, yeah, you're registered. Awesome. You have your camera on. Do you need any help getting your camera on? Click this button. Here's what's going to happen on the call. You're going to be invited into a breakout room. You're going to have this. Let's check your audio. Do you know how to mute yourself? They go through all of these things. Say, awesome, you're ready to go. And then you get sent into the bigger room, right? And then in the bigger room, there's a whole other connection period that's happening before the actual start time to the exercises. So that's how we address, which I think was the first part of your question. The second thing, and so we're having to do this on a massive scale right now to help a lot of different organizers, is we're really thinking about how do you create times. I mean, we've been on this call almost 2 hours, and that's about the max someone can be on a virtual call, right? And so what we're doing, instead of running an 8-hour conference with just breaks, is we're actually scheduling in, we're going to go 10 to 12. 10 to 10:30 is registration connection time. 10:30 to 12 is the open session. And then we're going to start back up, and we're going to do 1 to 3 with a Q&A at 2:30 to 3. We're actually avoiding bringing a lot of speakers in because we're finding with the breakout rooms and the functionality and with all the different exercises we can take people through, is that they can actually create better connections. They come up with more insights and share them to the bigger group than they ever did just by bringing speakers to the stage. if you do bring speakers to the stage, if that's the conference setup, there's a couple different ways you can do that. As I shared, moving the learning from passive to active is probably 1.0 to 2.0. If you want to move it from 1.0 to 3.0, what I would encourage you to do, instead of having one person as the speaker, is bring a panel up. Bring 3 or 4 people up all at once, ask them questions, have them answer the questions live in front of the group. Hopefully that answered some of your questions, Brian. Do you have a specific conference that's coming up that you're thinking of?
Yeah, I'm thinking of, I don't know the status of it, but I'm just gathering information. I'm not running the conference. It's just part of my company. Yeah. So.
And will this be the first time that it's in a virtual environment?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so if you want, I mean, happy to jump on a conversation with someone to give them some ideas on some of the things that can be done. Just maybe do an email introduction, and Jason and I, yourself, and someone else can jump on a call if we need to, depending on the size and the scope. We can always bring 1 or 2 other people in as well.
Okay.
Happy to help.
Thank you.
Yeah. Simon?
Any experience or perspective around the application of kind of this approach in kind of different cultures? So my role is very much a global role. What I dealt with this morning is a call with 29 regional learning leaders, all asking how they can virtualize their content tomorrow, and just trying to balance that kind of cultural component, which sometimes is true and sometimes is perceived, but just your view on that.
So the way that I would handle it is exactly what I did in the call the other night, is with a group of instructors from California. I didn't get on a call and say, hey, here's how I think we should do this. I took them through several exercises and then reflected back on what do they think of the exercise. I helped them unpack the learning, and then I said, what are the ways you can see bringing this into the learning environments that you're creating for other people? If so I'm getting to a point with this, Simon. If you utilize this approach, you can pretty much bring this into any setting, right? If you ask the right questions and facilitate the right conversations, I haven't seen a setting where this hasn't worked, and some of them have been the most dysfunctional, disruptive settings that you could ever imagine, right? I myself have brought it in on multiple levels in a university, and I'm an instructor myself, so I can say this. It's like making a joke about your own heritage. I'm an instructor, so I can say it, is that professors are taught how to debate. You bring any idea in front of them, they're going to debate it, right? That's what they're taught how to do. That's their whole career. So anytime I bring an idea to them, they're going to naturally go into debate mode. What I do in that setting is I don't even talk to them about the approach. I take them through the exercise. I just ask the questions and facilitate the conversations. And they're like, wow, that was great. I can't believe we got to all that, right? So just jump in and take them through it. They'll understand it. And then you can say, hey, how do you think we could use this exercise we just did in the classroom, or with our, with some of the groups that we lead, or the training that we're doing, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I know some of you, it's getting late. You're probably looking to jump off. You've got our email addresses as well. By all means, reach out to us. For any of you that didn't get the invite, the actual Zoom link, we can just comment in there if you didn't, and we can definitely get your email address if necessary. Any other questions before we jump off? All right. Thank you, everybody. Good luck with everything that's going on. Hopefully, taking things virtual actually gives you an opportunity to not only keep business going and doing the things you need to, but actually possibly elevate it in some way or fashion. Anything to add, Jason?
No, just a great job, Jeff, and thanks everybody for attending, and we're here to help.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone else, for being willing to share your stories. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.